Our first presentation will tell us why small brands are big online. Our presenter is a veteran of the Lead Marketing Conference, Keith Anderson, SVP of Product Strategy and Insights for Profits Hero. Keith, take it away.
John, thank you very much. Thanks to you and Linda, as always, for organizing these conferences, and it's good to be with everybody this morning. I'm Keith Anderson. I lead strategy for Profits Hero. We are an e-commerce performance analytics partner to more than 200 global manufacturers, a Nielsen Connected partner, and a Gartner pool vendor. So I'm going to share with you today some work that we've done largely in response to questions that we get from our customers who in the early days tended to be the incumbents in the CPG and grocery industry, that is large, national, often international number one or number two share position players in their given categories. But as our business has evolved, we've now got many sort of mid-tier and emerging brands as customers too. And so as we initially got posed the question, hey, why are these brands that we've never heard of outpacing us online? We started studying some of the structural distinctions about e-commerce broadly, online grocery, and Amazon specifically. And then as we got a lot of smaller brands as customers, we started looking at what they were doing differently from a strategic and a tactical point of view. And so today I just want to share a couple sort of new pieces of research and data, and we'll talk first about the structural advantages that smaller brands or new brands have in the context of online retailing. We'll talk about some of the specific strategies and tactics that these underdogs are using to their advantage. And then finally, we'll talk about some of the proven and other emerging response strategies that we see larger brands doing. As we go through this, please don't hesitate to use the Q&A field to post questions. I know John is going to chime in and share any of those with me. So let's start with a little data, and I'm being a bit provocative. The game is not really rigged, but I do just want to highlight what I hope for everybody in attendance is a deeper understanding of why there are so many brands that you compete with online that you may be less familiar with from a brick and mortar landscape. So I'm going to share two sort of rankings with you. The first is total U.S. e-commerce for basically the year to date through a couple months ago, and this is for the total U.S. excluding Amazon. So this would include Walmart.com and Kroger and Target and essentially any retailer that is not Amazon. And there were a couple things that I noted the first time I saw this data from our partners at Nielsen. In some categories, the number one players are companies that are under 5 or maybe 10 years old. Many of which started in either specialty or direct-to-consumer channels. So think of somebody like Dollar Shave Club, The Honest Company, or one of our customers, Blue Buffalo, started largely in the specialty channels. And then when I look at the highest growing brands, and this is based on unit growth, you'll notice a lot of private labels, which I thought was interesting, and I didn't put those in bold, as well as a lot of brands that fit sort of a similar profile to what I just described. Then, as you look at what's happening on Amazon specifically, you'll notice a couple things. And I didn't bold anything here, but I want to draw your attention to the highest growing brands because you'll find more growth among many of the brands here uh, excuse me, you'll find more emerging brands setting the pace for growth than you will having an absolute number one or number two or number three share position in many categories. And so I want to talk a little bit more about why we think that is. Now, many of you may recall a book by the name of The Longtail. It was by Chris Anderson, who at the time was the editor-in-chief of Wired magazine, and he really popularized this concept of the long tail on Amazon specifically. And all it really means is that naturally, in a national ship e-commerce business model like Amazon.com's, you have essentially an endless aisle. You don't need to limit your selection to linear physical shelf space. You can be in the business of selling a little bit of a lot. And so, we at Profitero are in the business of providing sales and share data on Amazon and see this play out time and again. Many of our customers think of their competitors and competitive set through the lens of brick and mortar competition. They have maybe 2 or 3 or 4 players that they are mostly focused on, and they tend not to focus on, and sometimes tend not to be aware of, what we sort of highlighted here as a blind spot. And these are products, sometimes only one product or a handful of products from brands that you may never have heard of, that are doing material volume from their perspective, and collectively are capturing a meaningful share of the category, even if any one of those players doesn't impact you the way that your traditional competitors do. And if you take just this simple exercise in comparison and contrasting, all we did was look at some keywords and compare the selection for a given online Kroger click list store to the number of results returned on Amazon.com. And hopefully what this underscores is that fundamentally you are competing with thousands, if not orders of magnitude, more products in the assortment on Amazon than you are in any other retail channel. And as we'll say, and as you'll see, any given shopper is not going to be exposed to all of these items. So it isn't as if a shopper is wandering through an endless aisle and seeing everything that's in the assortment. But because of this search-dominated pathway to products, it does mean that if there's demand for a given attribute or characteristic, and you see shoppers searching with keywords or phrases that reflect that demand, products that are genuinely relevant and favorably reviewed, and a few other factors, are going to find an audience on Amazon that they frankly can't find in many other retail environments, physical or digital. Beyond that simple distinction in selection, the other thing that I think really structurally challenges incumbents who use their scale both for operational efficiency but also as leverage in doing longer range planning and coordination with some of their retail partners, that allows them to get disproportionate share of shelf. Better placement, more brand blocking, better facings, you name it. And when you think about the way that an Amazon operates, beyond just the orders of magnitude larger selection, almost everything is algorithmically driven and dynamically rendered. And all that means is second to second, search to search, people see different search results. They might discover a new product that somebody just listed in the last 30 minutes. So it is both a noisier and larger competitive set when you're at the endless aisle, and it's a lot more dynamic and competitive because so much of this is decided by technology, not by relationships and joint business planning that's coordinated over months, quarters, years. It's much more real time. Now, I mentioned that search is really critical in the context of e-commerce, but really at Amazon specifically. So I'm sure many have seen, and I didn't even include in this deck, the data that has been coming out basically year after year for 5 or 6 years that shows that Amazon is the premier destination for product research, surpassing even Google for a majority of searches. And what we looked at here was if you go department by department, and by department I simply mean departments as Amazon defines them with their taxonomy, and look at the top 100 search terms and bucket those terms as either branded keywords, that is, I'm searching for Coca-Cola or Pepsi, or as general keywords, I'm searching for cola. What you see really, really evidently is that while it varies a bit by category, generally speaking, at the digital shelf, shoppers are searching generally. They are not searching for brands. Now, that's really true in home and garden. It's less true in toys, but a majority in every category are searching not for your brand. They're searching for attributes, characteristics, benefits, claims, keywords, and what that means is if you have a business model that is responsive to the demand reflected by search, and you execute your digital shelf strategy to position yourself at the top of page 1 for those results, you can have a really powerful growth model. So this is sort of some imaginary math, but I'm going to take a minute to walk you through it, and then I'm going to show you how this translates to advantages for small brands. So if you are lucky enough to have a brand that has pre-existing demand or equity, and it's already searched frequently, it's in that top 100 keyword list, then congratulations, because as we just saw, you're in the minority of brands that have a high frequency search volume for your brand. But if you do, you want to get on page 1, and you want to be as close to the top of page 1 as possible. And for a branded keyword, frankly, you should own as close to 100% of page 1 for that keyword as you can. And then you, of course, have to draw shoppers from that search result page to your detail page and convert shoppers to buyers. The bigger opportunity for most brands, whether they're big or small, is to identify general terms or category terms that are either already in high demand or are trending upwards, and again, maximize your placement and position on that result page. If you have a high net promoter score or average star rating and enough reviews, you can see a flywheel effect that improves conversion rates and can even improve your search position. That is, if the first cohort of shoppers that searches for you, buys you, and uses your product likes it, and they like it enough to leave you a 4-star or higher review, that can juice your position in search results, and it can absolutely impact your conversion rate. There is also, however, an impact from having significant brick-and-mortar distribution, and that is, if you are already in distribution in every food, drug, mass, club, outlet in the country, and I know that nobody has 100% distribution anymore, but If shoppers have been conditioned to find you everywhere they look, then they've also been conditioned not to look for you online. They may not have a reason to. But in contrast, if you are a new brand or a new product for which there is demand and you're not in distribution in every food, drug, mass, convenience, club, outlet, then shoppers have essentially been trained to go looking for you online, and especially on Amazon. And so there's this sort of inverse relationship between your brick and mortar distribution and a shopper's propensity to look for you online. If they can find you everywhere, then they walk a block and buy you where they can get you immediately. And if they know you're going to be tough to find, well, they go to the search engine for products. And this is what that looks like. This is a general keyword called sulfate-free conditioner. And, when you look at that keyword's rank, it's not the most frequently searched keyword on Amazon, but it's trending up pretty quickly. And when you look at who ranks and who's sponsoring for that keyword, you may be more of a beauty connoisseur than I am, but I was not familiar with many of the brands that I saw ranking on page one for that arguably niche keyword. And so this is part of the game that the small brands are playing, but it's also structurally why products and brands that are responsive to specific benefits, features, attributes, characteristics, claims, are having such an incredible time on Amazon specifically. Because if there's demand, and that demand is expressed by people typing, I want sulfate-free conditioner into Amazon, there are entrepreneurs that are monitoring the growth of those keywords. And if they don't already have products that respond to those keywords, they are developing and launching those products. And then they're executing with excellence at the digital shelf so that they show up at the top of those results pages on Amazon. So just to summarize, the endless aisle, the dynamic algorithmic merchandising, pricing, and promotion, and the search-dominated pathway to products really give a structural advantage to products that are in demand or on trend, but don't necessarily have widespread brick-and-mortar distribution. Now, beyond all that, there are some pretty compelling distinctions in how these small brands operate. And I have to start with how they define success, because I see some familiar names in attendance and a lot of folks that have spent their careers at big brands. And whether your company defines success today or did in the past this way, you'll know what I mean. But I've seen so many big brands wring their hands for years about whether a new channel, whether it's e-commerce or something else, will be incremental. Will we get our fair share? Will it be accretive to margins this quarter, this year? I imagine I would see some heads nodding if this were a video conference, because when you have a number one or number two position, frankly, you have more to lose from doing something new than to gain in many cases. The risk aversion is real, and so just contrast that with what a startup is thinking about and how they define success. If they're venture-backed, their mandate is growth. They have a license to invest ahead of demand, or at least ahead of profitability, to sustain that growth and grab early land in emerging channels. They don't have anything to defend, so it's all upside. Everything is incremental. They're starting from last place, so share is not their priority. They may want to gain share, but they certainly aren't expecting any kind of fair share. And they also, because they are starting from scratch, tend to invest even more aggressively in digital commerce and direct to consumer. They aren't worried necessarily about channel conflict, alienating existing partners. They know that they're going to need these tools and capabilities and competencies over the next decade. So they are pretty much all in with both feet. And what's really, I think, important to keep in mind is they have learned they can take their growth story from direct to consumer, as Dollar Shave Club did, or from Amazon, as a few other big brands did, to brick and mortar retail or to traditional CPG manufacturers, and say, just imagine what we could do together. This is what I did all by myself, and imagine what we could do if we married our new product development and innovation and our digital sales and marketing competency with your scale and retailer relationships and distribution and so on. There is also a huge distinction between how large and small organize, and this is pretty typical, but as a business scales, you tend to get more specialized. That is, you put more dedicated horsepower behind specific work and functions that need more focus. And so this is an example of one of the larger Amazon account teams at a top 10 global CPG company. So you'll notice they've got very experienced sort of executive leadership of the team itself, and then they have functional specialists on that team managing the portfolio of brands, managing sales and the commercial relationship, managing media and marketing investments, data analyst. And so, they've basically got a mini dedicated account team just for this one online account. And again, contrast small to big. This comes from the annual study that we do with Kantar Consulting. And it's last year's data because we're in flight as we speak with the 2019 study. But what we do is essentially look at dedicated headcount by the company's annual sales on Amazon. Because with LinkedIn, we can see how many people are dedicated to Amazon, and with our data, we can see what their annual Amazon sales are. And in this smaller, sub 50 million or even 50 million up to 100 million range, you tend to have maybe 2 or 3 people supporting Amazon. And when I was growing up, that persona was called sort of MacGyver. Somebody who you may not know how they're going to do it, and they may not know how they're going to do it, but you parachute them into a sticky situation, and you can count on them to figure it out and see it through. That is what you tend to see at companies on the smaller scale that are prioritizing Amazon. You see people that are comfortable with ambiguity, they're intrapreneurial or entrepreneurial, and they are generalists, sort of doing it all. And the upside of that is they see the bigger picture of how almost every aspect of doing business online and doing business with Amazon is interdependent. That is, we spent some time talking about search, and they understand that it doesn't matter how effective your search engine optimization or your paid search strategy is. If you're out of stock, you're not going to be displayed in search results. So that person is equally familiar with Amazon search algorithm and how to better forecast demand and make sure that Amazon's automatic replenishment system doesn't hit any glitches. They also tend to have license to think creatively and sort of act off menu. And this is a case study that was shared by us by a beverage brand, Runa Energy. They're an energy drink brand that tends to perform really well online, and they're not the Rockstar or Monster or Red Bull of the energy category, but they have some ingredient and attribute characteristics that are in demand. And what was really notable about what they did around Prime Day this year to us, beyond the results, was they didn't just participate in the sort of menu of merchandising options that Amazon presented to everyone. In fact, they did something, they did a basic price promotion on Amazon coinciding with Prime Day, but most of what they did was outside of Amazon. So they promoted the temporary price reduction on their own site, and especially on Slick Deals, a little upstream of Amazon. And word spread very quickly on Slick Deals and from Slick Deals to other deal sharing sites that, hey, there's a really great deal on these energy drinks on Amazon for Prime Day. And they saw a pretty profound flywheel effect from doing that. So the point of that is, building on that last topic, you don't have 6-month RFPs, you don't have 3-month decisions by committee at small emerging brands. I see it every month. If there's 1 or 2 people leading Amazon, they will walk down the hallway, talk to the company president, and then jump on the phone and say, okay, here's what we plan to do. Do you have any examples of companies that have done the same thing, or any watch outs for us? And it's that agility in the ability to decide and execute at the speed of this dynamic and algorithmic channel that I think gives some of these emerging players advantage. They also really, really focus. I have so much respect and admiration for how so many large brands manage the complexity of their business at scale. And it often is managed by being really relentless and disciplined about execution. Commercial execution, shelf execution, looking at every door and every aisle and every shelf and making sure that everything is executed with excellence. And when you have large portfolios, distribution in many stores, and a number 1 or 2 share position, that's the only way to defend it. What we see the emerging brands doing quite differently is really, really hyper-focusing on the next best action to drive the desired outcome. This is one framework that we use with many of our customers to simply sort of bucket their products based on 2 factors, primarily conversion rate and traffic, and then thirdly, sales. And what it would tell you to do is, if you've got products that are converting well, but aren't necessarily breakthrough products from a sales point of view yet, drive traffic to those products, because when people see them, they buy. They just aren't getting seen enough. Or if you've got products that are getting a lot of traffic, but the traffic isn't converting, go focus on price, content, or reviews, which tend to be the 3 factors that are most predictive of conversion rate. And this type of order of operations thinking is much more intuitive in our experience to smaller brands that by definition have too little time, too little money, and a team that's not big enough to do everything that they could do. Now, does it mean that some of the items in their portfolio or some of their customers don't get the attention that they otherwise might? Absolutely. But it also means they don't lose the forest for the trees by treating every account, every category, every brand, every product, and every activity as equal, because they know they have these constraints and these really ambitious growth targets. And so what they do next is what they expect to yield the most growth. They start with the product that has the most potential. So we spent a little time talking about some of the structural advantages that Amazon specifically, but e-commerce broadly, represent for emerging brands. We talked about some of the reasons organizationally and tactically you see emerging brands tend to outperform online. I want to close with a few of the things that we have seen larger brands begin to do that I think are really important to understand. Now, when I was building this presentation, this deal had just been announced, and it was the acquisition by Nike of a neighbor of ours here in Boston, a data science or analytic company that was acquired by Nike as part of its data science team, and maybe as importantly, consumer direct offense strategy. And I included it here simply to highlight a couple ideas that are all encapsulated in this one announcement. One, I think it's not lost on anyone that consumer direct is an increasingly important element of an overall channel sales and marketing strategy. I don't think anyone has illusions at this stage that consumer direct alone is the pathway to prosperity. There are very few examples of brands that began direct to consumer and stayed direct to consumer north of $500 million. Almost every one of them hits a ceiling and seeks either a larger manufacturer to land with or starts forging retailer distribution agreements because they just can't reach a large enough market independently. But you are seeing almost every large manufacturer acknowledge, while it may not be the largest distribution channel, the value of having more direct relationships with consumers, whether to message and market or to actually facilitate transactions, is increasingly strategic. It gives us more visibility into who we have as customers. It avoids the risk of disintermediation. There's all kinds of reasons you see this flourishing. Offense, I think, is also really key. To the earlier point about defining success and having a natural stance, what Nike is sort of saying is, we're an athletic brand, and we get the metaphor of offense and defense, and we can't play defense full time. We have to prioritize the future, which means, in some cases, not focusing on incrementality. In some cases, being comfortable over certain periods with break-even or unprofitability if we see a pathway to sustainable economics. And then finally, the data science component. I think that's just the lifeblood of how small brands tend to be agile and responsive to demand in ways that big brands are really increasingly learning from and prioritizing. And in that same study that we do every year, for the first time the last time we did it, we looked at least for the top 100 or so global CPG companies, whether they had a corporate venture capital arm, a brand accelerator that is an incubator or a program for new brands, or a technology accelerator that is a similar program for marketing technology or other sort of technology tools. And what you increasingly see is somewhere between 10 and 20% of the industry has one or more of these in place. Sometimes, increasingly, they are standalone, autonomous subsidiaries that are given the license to operate as startups. They have their own P&L, they have their own executive team, and generally they are being given the freedom to make decisions, but access to the platforms and the expertise of the larger parent entity. And it's too early to call whether that's an effective approach, but at a minimum, I wanted folks to know that it's happening. So as I look at the clock, let me conclude with a few things that I hope you take out of this discussion. I think whether you're a large established brand or a new brand, you have to start with how you define success and know that what you define as a win is going to determine your outcome in digital commerce. Not in total, but if you define success as an incremental, profitable sale every time, you will almost certainly lag the emerging brands that define success as being present, outpacing the category's growth, and maximizing share gain over a 5-year time scale. Secondly, you really have to prioritize consumers and sensing and responding to consumer demand. The biggest distinction between the way that new brands operate versus incumbents that I've observed is the emerging brands are very focused on consumers. And that may sound a little funny, but someone, it wasn't me, and I still can't find who it was, but somebody made the point that a lot of CPG marketers think of themselves as consumer marketers, but are ultimately sort of B2B marketers. That is, we've built disciplines and ways of working with retailers that are really fundamental to how those brands have been built and grown. But it's tough to argue that they are not one step removed from the consumer, from the end user. And what is a little different about these emerging brands is they are sensing not what any particular retailer is looking for, but they're looking at search logs and the keywords that are trending, and they're looking at product reviews, maybe for the best-selling items in their category on Amazon. And they're not only looking at the 5-star reviews, they're looking at the 1, 2, and 3-star reviews, and they're identifying issues or shortcomings or gaps, signs of unmet demand in a given category that they are then developing products to respond to, and they are executing through digital shelf sales and marketing so that they are found, considered, and bought by the shoppers looking for those attributes. I think thirdly, hopefully, you have an appreciation for the broader competitive set online. You are competing against the usual suspects, but you're also competing against this cohort of smaller players who can give you death by 1,000 cuts. Any one of them individually is going to look insignificant in contrast to your big competition in brick and mortar. But if you don't pay attention to them together, you will always wonder why you are constantly lagging what you perceive as your fair share. I think you also have to play where you can win. And so one of the things that I haven't talked about at all, but I think many in the industry are starting to see, is a growing focus on online grocery and click and collect specifically. And that simply means prioritizing some of the retail models, which here I'm using field as a metaphor for channels and partners, but the models that are favorable to a larger manufacturer. And if you think about it, a lot of online grocery, especially click and collect, is fulfilled from store inventory. And almost everything that I discussed in terms of the endless aisle and the heavily search-dominated pathway to products is less valid with the online grocers in the click and collect models than it is in the national ship Amazon.com model. And so you see a gravitation, I think, among the big players to those inherently limited selection models where a mainstream brand and a high-velocity SKU is going to continue to enjoy some of the benefits of being a national leader. And just to bring these last handful of points to a conclusion, I do think you've got to focus and beg, borrow, and emulate as much of what makes these smaller, more nimble and agile brands succeed, and that is preserving, to the extent that you can, the authenticity and the humanity that tends to set them apart in the ways that they engage with shoppers directly. So that concludes my commentary. John, I think we may have time for any questions, if any, and if not, thank you all, and I hope the rest of the session is as fun for you as it always is for us.
Sure, Keith. Just one regarding your points about top CPGs having brand accelerators and technology accelerators. What's your sense? Is this a good response from top CPGs, and do you see more of them adopting similar programs?
I think it's a bit early to tell. I definitely do see more of them doing it, and from my perspective, the reason I think they're doing it is as an experiment to see whether there's a more capital efficient way of remaining relevant and growing at pace than simply spending 5 or 7x trailing revenue to acquire some of these high-flying, high-growth new brands every couple years. I mean, that has been the pattern over the last 5 or 10 years, and I've been asked more and more by journalists, are there big CPGs that are really doing in-house R&D and innovation anymore, or has the model really shifted to letting the venture capitalists fund a lot of experimentation and innovation, and the big brands sort of pick off the winners once they get to a minimum inflection point of sales? And so I almost view what's been happening these last few years with some of these brands has been, let's see if we can set up a skunkworks subsidiary that we try to empower to operate as if they were a startup. But if they find some winners, we don't have to pay a multiple of 5 to 10x like we do if they're totally independent.
Okay, we just have a minute or two left, but there's one more question that just came in. In your opinion, Keith, is it a worthwhile strategy for big CPGs to hunt for product opportunities in search results, or is this only workable for brands started by upstart companies?
Yeah, it's a great question, and I think at a minimum, the play for a big company is you need to know what keywords are trending, and if there's any authentic claim to relevance in the products that you've already got to those trending keywords, you ought to be jockeying for position. So that doesn't mean you put gluten-free on your snow tire listing. It may be technically true, but you're not going to win any fans. I think the harder thing for a lot of big brands to do, but what I am seeing them start to at least incorporate into their R&D pipelines is, from a sort of new product development perspective, what should we be building next? And I don't think you can do it necessarily as responsibly as a brand new startup that has no sort of stage gating hurdles, but thinking more holistically about what's the product form that a shopper in this channel might prefer. Would they buy a powder instead of a fully liquid beverage? What kind of packaging is going to be optimal, as well as all of the other stuff that you tend to think about from a sales and marketing point of view. I do see more brands incorporating some of that thinking into their innovation pipeline planning, and I think that is worth doing.
Okay, well, thank you, Keith. That was a great presentation on a topic that a lot of people are talking about. If you need more information or want to chat about this with Keith some more, please contact him at keith@profitero.com. Thank you, Keith.